The exile who broke the kingdom. When a disgraced alpha finds a dying omega in his cabin, he makes the mistake that will shatter an empire. This is the story of Kael Varen, cast out, forgotten, left to freeze in the mountains. And Seren Ashfall, stolen, broken, used as a weapon by the very system meant to protect her. They had nothing. They were nothing. Until the night they stopped running and walked straight into hell itself. What they found there would bring a kingdom to its knees. Stay until the end to see how two outcasts became the most dangerous people alive. Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. The wind hit like fists. Kael Varen had lived in the Velroth Mountains long enough to know that winter didn't ask permission. It took what it wanted: warmth, breath, hope. Tonight, it wanted everything. He pushed through the snow, head down, shoulders hunched against the gale. The cabin wasn't far now. Another 100 yards, maybe less. His fingers had gone numb inside his gloves an hour ago. The deer carcass slung over his shoulder felt heavier with every step, but he couldn't leave it. Not out here. Not with wolves circling closer every night. 3 years. 3 years since the council had stripped him of his title, his pack, his name. 3 years since they'd thrown him into these mountains with nothing but the clothes on his back and a warning, "Come back and we'll finish what we started." He'd survived. That was supposed to mean something, but some nights like this, he wondered if survival was just another word for slow death. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset. His breath came out in white clouds that the wind tore away before they could fully form. The trees groaned under the weight of ice. Branches snapped in the distance like breaking bones. Kael adjusted the deer and kept moving. His left knee throbbed, an old injury from a fight he'd lost 3 winters back. His ribs ached on the right side where they'd healed wrong after the beating that got him exiled. His body was a map of failures, each scar a reminder of why he was here. Alone. Forgotten. Exactly what they wanted. The cabin appeared through the storm like a ghost. Small, crooked, patched together with whatever scraps he could salvage from abandoned settlements lower in the valleys. The roof leaked, the door hung crooked. The windows were covered with oiled cloth because glass was a luxury he couldn't afford. But it was his. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney. He'd left the fire burning before he left at dawn, banked with enough wood to last until nightfall. The chimney was dark. Kael stopped. His instincts, dulled by years of isolation, suddenly roared to life. Someone had been here. Or something. He lowered the deer into the snow and pulled the knife from his belt. It wasn't much. 6 inches of rusted steel he'd traded for last summer at a settlement 3 days south. The trader had looked at him like he was diseased. Exiles didn't get fair trades. They got scraps and suspicion. But the knife was sharp enough to kill. He approached the door slowly, every sense on alert. The snow around the cabin was disturbed, not just from the storm, footprints, recent ones, small, human. The lock was broken, not forced, opened. Someone knew how to pick locks. Kael's jaw tightened. If it was hunters, they'd already be gone, or waiting inside to put a crossbow bolt through his skull the moment he entered. If it was wolves, they'd have torn the place apart looking for food. But the door hung slightly ajar, snow piling against the threshold, and inside, silence. He kicked the door open and stepped inside, knife raised. The fire was out. The room was freezing, cold enough that he could see his breath even indoors. His few possessions were untouched: the pile of furs in the corner, the dried meat hanging from the rafters, the 3 books he'd managed to save from his old life stacked on the makeshift shelf, and lying on the floor near his cot, half-conscious and shivering violently, was a woman. An omega. Kael froze. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with long dark hair matted with blood and dirt and something that looked like oil. Her clothes were torn, barely holding together, more rags than fabric. Deep bruises marked her arms and neck, the kind that came from restraints, not accidents. Her breathing was shallow, labored, each inhale sounding like it cost her. And she was dying. For a long moment, Kael just stood there, knife still in hand, trying to piece together what the hell he was looking at. Omegas didn't come to the mountains. Not alone. Not like this. They were too valuable, too protected. The council controlled them like currency, assigned them to packs, monitored their movements, tracked their cycles. An omega alone in the wilderness wasn't just unusual. It was impossible. And then he saw her wrists, shackle marks, fresh ones, the skin rubbed raw and bleeding. And on her left forearm, partially hidden by grime, was a brand, small, deliberate, a serial number. Damn it, he muttered. He should have walked out, should have left her there and disappeared into the woods until whoever was hunting her moved on. Getting involved with a runaway Omega, especially one who looked like she'd escaped from somewhere official, was a death sentence. The council didn't forgive. They didn't forget. And they sure as hell didn't let their property walk away. But she made a sound, a soft, broken whimper that cut through the storm outside and landed somewhere in his chest he thought had gone dead years ago. He cursed again and dropped to his knees beside her. "Hey!" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. Pale green, unfocused, ringed with dark circles that spoke of weeks without real sleep. She stared at him like she wasn't sure if he was real or just another hallucination. "Don't." Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Don't send me back." Kael exhaled slowly. "I'm not sending you anywhere. Not yet." "Please." Tears tracked through the dirt on her face. "Please. I can't go back." "Hey, stop." He held up a hand. "I said I'm not sending you anywhere. But you need to calm down before you kill yourself." She tried to nod, but the movement made her gasp in pain. Kael grabbed a blanket from the cot, one of the few things he owned that wasn't falling apart, and wrapped it around her. She was ice cold, her lips tinged blue. Hypothermia. Maybe worse. He'd seen men die from exposure before. It didn't take long once the shivering stopped. She was still shivering. That was good. He carried her to the cot and laid her down as gently as he could. She didn't resist, didn't speak, just watched him with those wide, terrified eyes that made him feel like he was the dangerous one. Kael rebuilt the fire quickly, feeding it until the flames roared back to life. The cabin warmed slowly, and he pulled off his coat, tossing it over her for extra warmth. It was soaked from the storm, but it was better than nothing. She was soaked through. Her clothes would kill her if he left them on. "I need to get these off you," he said, keeping his voice even. "You'll freeze otherwise." She didn't answer, just closed her eyes. He worked quickly, peeling away the wet fabric and replacing it with dry blankets. His hands were steady, clinical. He'd patched up pack members before, stitched wounds, set bones, pulled arrows out of shoulders. This was the same. Except it wasn't, because when he saw the scars, dozens of them, crisscrossing her back and ribs in patterns too deliberate to be accidental, he knew exactly what kind of hell she'd crawled out of. Torture. Systematic. Professional. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. Maybe she couldn't. Kael stood and moved to the corner of the cabin where he kept his supplies. Not much. Dried meat, herbs he'd gathered during the summer, a few jars of salve he'd bartered for in the last village he dared enter. He grabbed what he could and brought it back. "Drink this." He held a cup of water to her lips. She drank. Slowly at first, then desperately, coughing when it went down too fast. "Easy," he said. "You're safe here." Her eyes snapped to his, sharp and accusing despite the exhaustion. "No one's safe." Kael didn't argue. She was right. He sat back on his heels and studied her. Dark hair, pale skin, those green eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and still hadn't looked away. She was small, fragile even. But there was something else underneath the fear. Something that hadn't broken yet. Something that refused to. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, like even that much information was dangerous to give. "Seren." "Seren," he nodded. "I'm Kael." "I know who you are." That caught him off guard. "How?" "Everyone knows who you are." Her voice was barely a whisper. "The Alpha who tried to stand up to the council, the one they exiled for treason." Kael's jaw clenched. That was a long time ago. "Not long enough." She closed her eyes again. "They're still looking for me. If they find me here, if they find you helping me, they won't." "You don't know that." "No," Kael admitted, "but I know these mountains, and I know how to disappear." She didn't respond. Within minutes, she'd slipped into unconsciousness again, her breathing evening out into something that almost resembled sleep. Kael sat by the fire and watched her breathe. He should have left her, should have put her outside and let the storm take her. It would have been kinder than what was coming if the council found her here. But he didn't, and he didn't know why. The storm raged through the night. Kael stayed awake, feeding the fire, listening to the wind howl outside like something alive and hungry. Every few hours, he checked on Seren, felt her forehead for fever, made sure she was still breathing, adjusted the blankets when she kicked them off in her sleep. She didn't wake, didn't speak, just existed in that space between life and death, where the body fought battles the mind couldn't. By the time dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. Kael stepped outside and surveyed the damage. Snow piled waist-high in some places. The wind had torn part of the roof loose, and he'd have to fix that before the next storm hit. The deer carcass he'd left outside was half buried, but intact. He dug it out and hauled it inside, hanging it from the rafters to butcher later. Meat was meat. He couldn't afford to waste it. When he came back in, Seren was awake. She'd managed to sit up, though she looked like it had cost her everything she had left. Her eyes tracked him as he moved around the cabin, wary but not quite afraid. "You need to eat," Kael said. "I'm fine." "You're not." He heated water over the fire and made a weak broth from the last of his dried herbs and a few scraps of venison. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and it was food. She took the cup without a word and drank slowly, both hands wrapped around it like she was afraid he'd take it back. Kael sat across from her and waited. The silence stretched. Outside, snow slid off the roof in heavy chunks that hit the ground with dull thuds. Finally, she spoke. "You want to know what happened?" "Only if you want to tell me." She stared into the fire for a long time before answering. When she did, her voice was flat, empty of emotion. The way people talked when the only way to get through the story was to pretend it happened to someone else. "I was taken," she said quietly. 3 years ago. They came in the night. Soldiers. Council soldiers. They said I was being conscripted for the war effort, that my healing ability was needed to save lives. Kael's stomach sank. He'd heard rumors, whispers about Omegas disappearing from villages, about gifted healers being taken and never seen again. He thought they were just stories, the kind of paranoid folklore that grew in isolated communities. He'd been wrong. "They didn't conscript you," he said. "No." Her voice was still flat. "They locked me in a compound with 30 other Omegas, all of us healers, all of us gifted. They kept us in cells, fed us just enough to stay alive, and they used us." "Used you how?" "Experiments." She said the word like it tasted bitter. "They wanted to see how far they could push our abilities, how much power they could extract. They'd bring in wounded soldiers, sometimes prisoners, and make us heal them, over and over, until we collapsed. Then they'd wait until we recovered and do it again." Kael's hands curled into fists. "How many survived?" 12. Last I checked." She took another sip of broth. "Some died from exhaustion, others just gave up, stopped eating, stopped fighting. There's only so much you can take before you break." "But you didn't break." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw anger in those green eyes. Real, burning anger. "I wanted to, every single day. But I kept thinking about everyone they'd hurt, everyone they'd killed, and I couldn't let them win." "So you escaped?" She nodded. 2 weeks ago. There was a transfer. New prisoners coming in. The guards were distracted. I picked the lock on my cell. Took me 3 months to figure out how with a piece of wire I'd hidden, and I ran. "And they've been hunting you ever since?" "Yes." She set down the cup. Her hands were shaking. "They don't let people leave, ever. I'm property to them. Evidence. If I talk, if anyone finds out what they've been doing, the council falls. Maybe." She didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe they just kill everyone who knows and keep going." Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been bothering him since she woke up. "Why come here?" "Because no one comes here." She looked at him directly. "You're exiled, forgotten. The council wrote you off years ago. I thought maybe you'd understand what it's like to be thrown away." Kael didn't know what to say to that. "I'm sorry," she added. "I shouldn't have dragged you into this. I didn't know where else to go." "You didn't drag me into anything," Kael said. "I made the choice to help you. That's on me." "You should unmake it. Tell me to leave. Forget you ever saw me. Too late for that. She almost smiled. Almost. You're an idiot. Yeah, I've been told. 3 days passed. Seren grew stronger. Not healed, not even close, but stable. She could walk without collapsing now. Eat without choking. Sleep for more than an hour at a time without waking up screaming. Kael kept his distance. He didn't ask more questions about the compound or what they'd done to her. Didn't push, just made sure she had food, warmth, and space to recover. But he watched her. She was careful, methodical. Every movement calculated to waste as little energy as possible. She'd check the door 3 times before settling down to sleep. She'd position herself so she could see the entrance no matter where she sat. She never fully relaxed. She was still running, even sitting still. On the 3rd night, Kael was outside chopping wood for the fire when she came out. She'd wrapped herself in one of his blankets, and the cold hit her immediately. She flinched but didn't go back inside. "You should rest," Kael said, not looking up from the log he was splitting. "I've rested enough." "Your body disagrees." "My body doesn't get a vote." She watched him work for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did they exile you?" Kael brought the axe down hard. The log split clean in 2. "I asked the wrong questions." "What questions?" "The kind that make powerful people nervous." He set another log on the stump. 3 years ago, there was a raid on a settlement near the eastern border. 30 people killed. The council said it was bandits, but the evidence didn't match. The wounds were too clean, too professional, and there were tracks. Military boots, council-issued weapons. Seren was quiet, listening. "I brought it to the council," Kael continued. "Presented the evidence. Asked them to investigate. They told me to drop it, said I was causing trouble. I didn't listen." He paused. "So they made me an example. Brought me up on charges of insubordination, stripped my rank, and threw me out here to rot. And you just accepted it. What choice did I have?" He looked at her. "They had the power. I didn't. Fighting them would have gotten me killed and changed nothing. So you gave up. That stung more than it should have. I survived. Is that what you call this?" She gestured at the cabin, the mountains, the endless white. "Hiding in the middle of nowhere, talking to no one, doing nothing? Yes. That's not survival. That's just slow dying." Kael's jaw tightened. "And what would you have me do? March back down there and get myself executed?" "I'd have you do something." Her voice was sharp now. "Anything, because sitting here doing nothing makes you just as guilty as they are." "I didn't torture anyone." "No, you just let them get away with it." The words hung in the cold air between them. Kael wanted to be angry, wanted to tell her she didn't know what she was talking about, but he couldn't, because she was right. "I'm sorry," Seren said after a moment. "That was unfair." "No, it wasn't." Kael picked up another log. "You're right, I gave up. I told myself it was survival, but really I was just scared." "Of dying?" "Of mattering." He brought the axe down. "As long as I'm out here, I don't have to face what I could have been. What I should have been." Seren stepped closer. "It's not too late." "Yes, it is." "Why?" "Because I'm nobody now. Just another exile the world forgot." "Good," Seren said. "Then they won't see you coming." Kael looked at her. Really looked at her. And he saw it. That thing that hadn't broken. That fire that kept burning even when everything else turned to ash. "You're planning something," he said. "Maybe. Something stupid." "Probably." She pulled the blanket tighter. "But I can't do it alone." "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you're tired of hiding." Kael was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What exactly did you have in mind?" She smiled. It was small, sharp, and dangerous. "I'm going to destroy them." "The compound?" "The whole system." Her eyes blazed in the fading light. "The council, the program, all of it. I'm going to burn it down and make sure the whole kingdom watches it fall." "That's insane." "I know. They'll kill you." "They're already trying." Kael shook his head. "You can't fight the council. They're too powerful, too connected." "I'm not going to fight them." Seren's smile widened. "I'm going to expose them. Show everyone what they've been doing. And once people know, once they see what monsters run this kingdom, the council won't be able to hide anymore. And how exactly do you plan to do that? The compound keeps records, files on every Omega they've taken, every experiment they've run, every crime they've committed. She leaned in. I know where they keep them. I know how to get in. And I know how to make sure those files reach people who can't be silenced. You want to go back? Kyle stared at her. You want to break into the place you just escaped from? Yes. That's suicide. Only if we get caught. We? I need help, Seren said simply. I can't do this alone. But you know tactics. You know how the council thinks. And you have nothing left to lose. That's not true. Then what do you have to lose? Kael opened his mouth to answer and found he couldn't. She was right. Again. He had nothing, no pack, no purpose, no reason to wake up tomorrow beyond spite and stubbornness. If we do this, he said slowly, we can't go halfway. If we're going after the council, we need proof that can't be ignored, evidence that can't be buried. I know. And we'll need allies, people willing to stand against the council once the truth comes out. I have names, people who lost family to the program, people who've been asking questions like you did. She paused. People who are ready to fight if someone gives them a reason. Kael looked at the axe in his hands, then at the cabin, then at the mountains that had been his prison for 3 years, and he made a choice. All right, he said, let's burn it down. But they spent the next day planning. Seren drew maps in the dirt floor, layouts of the compound, guard rotations, security checkpoints. She knew the place inside and out, every blind spot, every weakness. The records are kept in the main archive, she said, pointing to a square near the center of her crude map. 3rd floor, east wing. There's a guard posted outside 24 hours, but he changes shifts at midnight. That's a 3-minute window when the hallway is empty. 3 minutes isn't much. It's enough. The door has a mechanical lock. I can pick it in under 2. And once we're inside, we grab everything we can carry and run like hell. Kael studied the map. What about exits? Main gate is guarded, but there's a service entrance on the south side, laundry. They use it for deliveries. It's locked from the inside, but the lock is weak. I could kick it down if I had to. How far from the archive to this exit? 2 floors, maybe 100 yards. She looked up. If we move fast and don't get seen, we can be out in under 10 minutes. That's a lot of ifs. You have a better plan? Kyle didn't. They kept planning, worked out contingencies, identified risks. By the time the sun set, they had something that almost resembled a strategy. It was a terrible strategy, full of holes and assumptions and things that could go catastrophically wrong. But it was a strategy. We'll need supplies, Kael said. Rope, weapons, something to carry the files in. I can get weapons, Seren said. There's a settlement 2 days east, small, but they have a blacksmith. I have coin, took it from the compound before I left. You stole from the people holding you prisoner? I prefer liberated. She almost grinned. Besides, they owed me 3 years of back pay. Despite everything, Kael laughed. It felt strange. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. We leave tomorrow, Seren said, before they get too close. They're already close. I know. That's why we move first. Kael nodded. Then he asked the question that had been nagging at him since she first mentioned her plan. Why are you really doing this? I told you to expose... No. He cut her off. That's the goal. I'm asking why. You could run, disappear into the wilderness, change your name, live quiet and die old. Why risk everything to fight people who'll crush you the first chance they get? Seren was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. Because I'm not the only one they took. There are 11 others still in that compound. 11 people who wake up every day in hell because the world doesn't know they exist. She looked at him. I can't save them by running. I can only save them by making sure everyone knows what's happening, by forcing the kingdom to look at what it's allowed to happen in the dark. And if it doesn't work, if people don't care, then at least I tried. She stood up. I'm tired of being a victim. I'm tired of being afraid. If I'm going to die, and I probably am, I'd rather die fighting than die hiding. Kael understood that. He'd spent 3 years hiding. and it hadn't saved him from anything. It had just made him smaller. "All right," he said. "We do this. Together." Seren held out her hand. Kael shook it. And in that moment, two people the world had thrown away decided they were done being discarded.
But it is Tiasa.
That night, Kael couldn't sleep. He lay on the floor, he'd given Seren the cot, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the fire crackle and Seren's quiet breathing. Tomorrow, they'd leave, head east, gather supplies, and then they'd do something so monumentally stupid that it would either change everything or get them both killed. Probably both. He should have been scared, should have been questioning every decision that led him here. But he wasn't. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than emptiness. Purpose. The door rattled. Kael was on his feet instantly, knife in hand. "Get up," he whispered. Seren was already awake, eyes wide in the firelight. The rattling stopped. Then came the voices. "Omega!" The shout was loud, commanding, and close. Too close. "We know you're in there. Come out, and the Alpha lives." Kael moved to the window and peered through a gap in the oiled cloth. 8 figures. Maybe more. Armed with crossbows and swords. Council uniforms. Council hunters. "How did they find us?" Kael hissed. "I don't know." Seren's face was pale. "I was careful. I covered my tracks. Doesn't matter." Kael's mind raced. The cabin had 1 door, 2 windows. No back exit. If they surrounded the place, they were trapped. He turned to her. "Can you fight?" "I'm a healer, not a soldier." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes. "I can try." "Good enough." The voice outside shouted again. "You have 1 minute to surrender. After that, we come in." Kael laughed bitterly. "They're lying." "I know." "So what do we do?" Seren looked at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw something other than fear or exhaustion in her eyes. Determination, and something else. Calculation. "I heal you," she said. "What?" "You're injured. I can feel it. Old wounds, broken ribs that never set right, torn ligaments, fractures that healed crooked." She stepped closer. "Let me fix you. Let me make you whole." "They'll sense it. They'll know you're here. That's how they track you, isn't it? Your power?" "They already know I'm here." She reached for his hand. "But right now, you're fighting at half strength, maybe less. If they come through that door and you're not at full capacity, we're dead anyway." Kael stared at her. "It'll hurt." "I know. And it'll tell them exactly where you are." "I know." She grabbed his hand. "Do you trust me?" He should have said no, should have pushed her away and fought with what he had. But he looked into those green eyes and saw something he recognized, someone who'd decided they were done running. "Yeah," he said. "I trust you." She placed both hands on his chest, closed her eyes, and breathed. The power came fast, too fast. Kael gasped as warmth flooded through him, not gentle, not gradual, but like fire through his veins. His broken ribs shifted, bone grinding against bone as they realigned. His shoulder socket popped, cartilage rebuilding itself in seconds. The torn muscle in his left knee knitted back together. Scar tissue dissolved, fractures sealed. It felt like being unmade and remade at the same time. And it hurt like hell. He tried not to scream, failed. Outside, the hunters stopped shouting, because they felt it too. The surge of power. The unmistakable signature of an Omega healer working at full strength. "Omega!" The voice turned furious. "Stand down or we burn you out!" Seren pulled back, breathing hard, sweat dripping down her face. "How do you feel?" Kael flexed his hands, rolled his shoulders, bent his knee. No pain. For the first time in years, no pain at all. "Like I could fight an army," he said. "Good." Seren picked up a piece of firewood, hefting it like a club. "Because here they come." The door exploded inward. The first hunter through the door took Kael's fist to the throat before he could raise his crossbow. The man went down choking, and Kael was already moving. He grabbed the crossbow as it fell, spun, and fired. The bolt caught the second hunter in the shoulder. Not fatal, but enough to drop him. 2 down, 6 to go. "Back!" Kael shoved Seren toward the corner of the cabin as 3 more hunters poured through the doorway. They moved like professionals, trained, coordinated, spreading out to flank. One of them spotted Seren and raised his crossbow. Kael threw himself sideways, slamming into the man's arm just as the bolt released. It went wide, burying itself in the wall 2 inches from Seren's head. She didn't scream, didn't freeze. She swung the firewood in her hands and caught the hunter across the jaw with a crack that made Kael wince. The man staggered. She hit him again. He went down. Not bad for a healer, Kael muttered. Shut up and fight. A blade came at him from the left. Kael twisted, felt it slice across his ribs. Shallow, but it burned. He caught the attacker's wrist, yanked him forward, and drove his knee into the man's gut. The hunter doubled over. Kael brought his elbow down on the back of his skull, 4 down, but the remaining 4 had regrouped. And they weren't rushing in anymore. One of them, older, scarred, with captain's insignia on his collar, stepped into the doorway and surveyed the scene with cold calculation. "Stand down, Varen," the captain said. His voice was calm, too calm. "You're only making this worse." "For who?" Kael kept himself between the captain and Seren. "For everyone." The captain's eyes flicked to Seren. "The Omega is council property. Harboring her is treason. But if you surrender now, I'm authorized to overlook your involvement. Walk away. Forget this happened." "That's generous," Kael said. "I'm trying to save your life. By letting you take her back to that compound? To torture her some more?" The captain's expression didn't change. "What happens to council assets isn't your concern. She's not an asset, she's a person." "The law disagrees." The captain took a step forward. "Last chance, Varen. Step aside or we put you down." Kael felt Seren shift behind him, felt her hand press against his back, not for support, but in warning. She was getting ready to run. He couldn't let that happen. "You know what your problem is?" Kael said to the captain. "You think I give a damn about the law." Then he lunged. The fight was ugly and brutal, and nothing like the clean sword duels nobles practiced in their courtyards. Kael went low, tackled the captain around the waist, and drove him backward into the 2 hunters behind him. They all went down in a tangle of limbs. Someone punched him in the kidney. Kael gasped, twisted, got an elbow in his face that made his vision flash white. He tasted blood, but he didn't stop. He got his hands on someone's throat and squeezed. The man clawed at his wrists, thrashing. Kael held on until the thrashing stopped. A boot caught him in the ribs, right where the blade had cut earlier. Pain exploded through his side. He rolled away, came up with someone's dropped dagger in his hand, and slashed blindly. The blade caught flesh. Someone screamed. Kael didn't wait to see who. He grabbed Seren's arm and pulled her toward the back window. "Go." "What about—" "Go!" She kicked out the oiled cloth and climbed through. Kael followed, dragging himself over the sill just as a crossbow bolt punched through the space where his head had been a second before. They hit the snow running. The forest was dark, the moonlight barely penetrating the canopy. Snow made every step treacherous. Branches clawed at their faces and arms. Behind them, the hunters were shouting, organizing, giving chase. "This way!" Kael veered left toward a rocky outcrop he knew from years of hunting these woods. It wasn't much, but it would give them cover. They scrambled up the rocks, boots slipping on ice. Seren's breath came in ragged gasps. She was flagging, still weak from her captivity, from the healing she'd done on Kael. He grabbed her hand and pulled her up the last few feet. They crouched behind a boulder just as the first hunter burst into view below. "Spread out!" The captain's voice echoed through the trees. "They can't have gone far." Kael pressed a finger to his lips. Seren nodded, her face pale in the dim light. They waited. The hunters moved through the forest below like ghosts, systematic and thorough. One of them passed within 10 feet of their position. Kael held his breath, gripped tight on the dagger he'd taken. If they were found here, it was over. But the hunter moved past, kept going. The sounds of the search grew fainter. They waited another 10 minutes before Kael risked a whisper. "We need to move. They'll circle back." "Where do we go?" "East." "Like we planned. But we can't stay on the main trails. They'll be watching those." "I can barely walk." "I know." Kael looked at her, really looked at her. She was shivering, her lips tinged blue again. The healing had taken too much out of her. Can you make it to the settlement? I don't have a choice. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. She pushed herself upright, wobbled, caught herself against the rock. Let's go before I change my mind. They moved through the forest like hunted animals, slow, careful, stopping every few minutes to listen. The night was full of sounds that could be wind or could be death. Every snapped branch made Kael's heart kick against his ribs. By dawn, they'd put maybe 5 miles between themselves and the cabin. Not nearly enough. Seren collapsed against a tree, gasping. I need to rest. We can't stop here, it's too exposed. I don't care, I can't keep going. Kael scanned the area. They were in a small clearing ringed by pines. Not ideal, but defensible if it came to that. And Seren looked like she'd fall over if he pushed her any further. All right, he said. 10 minutes, then we move. She slid down the trunk and closed her eyes. Kael kept watch, every sense straining for signs of pursuit. The forest was waking up around them, birds calling, small animals rustling through the underbrush. Normal sounds, safe sounds. He didn't trust them. Kael. Seren's voice was quiet. Yeah? Thank you for not leaving me. I told you, I made my choice. You could have changed your mind. So could you. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Why didn't you? When the captain offered you a way out. Kael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 3 years ago, the council gave me a choice too. Stand down or get exiled. I stood down. Told myself it was the smart move, the safe move. He met her gaze. I've regretted it every day since. I'm not making that mistake again. Even if it gets you killed? Especially then. He almost smiled. At least I'll die doing something that matters. Seren studied him like she was trying to figure out if he meant it. Then she said, You're not as broken as you think you are. Neither are you. I'm pretty broken. Yeah, but you're still fighting. That counts for something. She didn't respond, just closed her eyes again. Kael let her rest the full 10 minutes, then another 5, then 10 more. She needed it, and if he was being honest, so did he. The fight at the cabin had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit. His ribs ached where he'd been kicked. His knuckles were split and bleeding. The cut on his side had stopped bleeding, but it still burned. But the deep, chronic pain that had lived in his bones for years was gone. Seren had done that. Given him back something he thought he'd lost forever. He owed her. Time to move, he said finally. Seren groaned but stood. I hate you. I know. They kept walking. The settlement was called Greystone, though Kael had never figured out why. There wasn't a greystone anywhere near the place. Just wood and mud and people trying to scratch out a living on the edge of civilization. They reached it 2 days later, half frozen and completely exhausted. Kael had been here before. Once, about a year ago, to trade furs for salt and medicine. The people had looked at him like he carried plague. Exiles weren't welcome, but coin was coin, so they'd taken his trade and sent him on his way. He was betting they'd do the same now. The settlement was small, maybe 30 buildings clustered around a central square. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few people moved between the buildings, bundled against the cold. One of them spotted Kael and Seren and stopped. Then another. Then a third. By the time they reached the square, half the settlement was watching. We need supplies, Kael said to the nearest person, a middle-aged woman with suspicious eyes. Food, rope, medicine. We can pay. The woman looked at Seren, then at Kael. You're the exile. Yeah. And her? None of your business. The woman's eyes narrowed. Council's been through here 3 days ago. Asking about a runaway Omega. Said there'd be a reward for information. Kael's hand moved to his knife. That's so? Don't even think about it. The woman held up her hands. I'm not turning anyone in. Council can rot for all I care. But you should know. There's others here who'd sell their own mothers for a bag of silver. Noted. Kael relaxed slightly. The supplies? Blacksmith's at the north end, but he won't trade with you. Not after the council came through. Why not? Because they said anyone caught helping the Omega would be charged as an accessory. The woman shrugged. Most folks here don't want that kind of trouble. And you? I've got my own troubles. Don't need yours on top of them. She turned to leave, then paused. There's a traitor. Name's Marin. Lives in the red house on the east side. She doesn't give a damn about the council. Might help you, might not, but she's your best shot. Thanks. The woman walked away without another word. Seren leaned closer to Kael. This is a bad idea. You have a better one? Running, hiding, literally anything that doesn't involve walking into a settlement full of people who want to turn us in. We need supplies. We won't make it to the compound without them. We won't make it out of this settlement alive. Probably not. Kael started walking toward the east side. But we're here now. Might as well see it through. Seren cursed under her breath and followed. The red house was easy to spot. The only building painted anything other than brown or gray. Kael knocked on the door. It opened immediately. The woman who answered was tall, lean, maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair and the kind of eyes that saw through bullshit. She looked at Kael, then at Seren, then back at Kael. You're either very brave or very stupid, she said. Little bit of both, Kael admitted. Council's looking for you. We know. Offering good money. I'm sure they are. The woman, Marin, presumably, smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. How much can you pay? Seren pulled a small pouch from inside her coat and opened it. Silver coins glinted in the dim light. Marin's eyebrows went up. Where'd you get that? Does it matter? Seren asked. Suppose not. Marin stepped aside. Come in before someone sees you. They entered quickly. The house was warm, cluttered with trade goods, furs, weapons, dried food, bolts of cloth. Everything a person might need to survive in the wilderness. Marin closed the door and turned to face them. What do you need? Rope, climbing gear, weapons, dried food for a week, medical supplies. Kael paused. And information. Information's expensive. We can pay. Marin studied them for a long moment. Then she said, You're going after the compound. It wasn't a question. Kael didn't bother denying it. How'd you know? Because I'm not an idiot. Marin moved to a back room and returned with a bundle of rope and a pair of climbing harnesses. The council doesn't send 8 hunters into the mountains for a runaway Omega unless that Omega knows something they don't want getting out. She dumped the gear on the table and added a pair of daggers, several days' worth of dried meat, and a small medical kit. That enough? She asked. It's a start, Kael said. What about the information? What do you want to know? The compound. How many guards? What kind of security? Any weaknesses we can exploit? Marin shook her head. You're serious about this? Yes. You'll die. Maybe. But we're doing it anyway. Marin was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. I had a daughter, Lyra, gifted healer, sweet kid, wanted to help people. Her voice went flat. Council took her 4 years ago, said it was for the war effort. I never saw her again. Seren went very still. What was her last name? Greyward. Why? I knew her. Seren's voice was barely a whisper. She was in the cell next to mine. She stopped, swallowed hard. She didn't make it. I'm sorry. Marin's face didn't change, but something in her eyes went very cold. How did she die? They pushed her too hard, made her heal too many people at once. Her heart gave out. When? 2 years ago. Marin nodded slowly. Then she went to a drawer and pulled out a rolled map. The compound's here. She spread the map on the table and pointed to a location about 3 days south. It's built into the side of a mountain. Only one main entrance, but there's a service door on the south side, used for deliveries. That's your way in. Guards? Kael asked. 20 at any given time, rotating shifts. They change at midnight, dawn, noon, and dusk. You want the midnight rotation. That's when they're least alert. What about inside? I don't know the layout. Never been inside, but I know they keep the records on the 3rd floor, east wing. You'll need to get past the guards, pick the lock, grab what you can, and get out before anyone notices. That's a lot of assumptions, Seren said. You have a better plan? Not really. Marin rolled up the map and handed it to Kael. Take it, and take this too. She pulled a small glass vial from a shelf. Sleeping draft. Pour it in someone's drink, they'll be out for 6 hours. Might help with the guards. How much do we owe you? Kael asked. Marin looked at the silver on the table, then at Seren, then at him. "Nothing," she said. "Just promise me you'll make them pay for what they did to my daughter." "We will," Seren said. "Good." Marin opened the door. "Now get out of here before someone sees you." They gathered the supplies and left. They made camp that night in a cave about 3 miles outside the settlement. It wasn't much, just a shallow depression in the rocks. But it was out of the wind and hidden from casual view. Kyle built a small fire while Seren sorted through the supplies Marin had given them. The rope was good quality. The daggers were sharp. The food would last if they rationed it. They might actually pull this off, or they might die trying. "You're quiet," Seren said. "Thinking." About how many ways this can go wrong. That's encouraging. Kale smiled despite himself. "I'm a realist. You're a pessimist." "Same thing." Seren shook her head and moved closer to the fire. "Tell me about your pack. Before the exile." "Why?" "Because I want to know who you were. Before all this." Kale was quiet for a long moment. He didn't like talking about his past. It felt like picking at old wounds that had never healed right. But Seren had told him her story. Fair was fair. "I was second in command," he said finally, "under Alpha Corvus. He was a good leader, fair, strong, the kind of Alpha people followed because they wanted to, not because they were forced to." "What happened to him?" "The council had him killed, made it look like an accident." Kale stared into the fire. "I tried to prove it, tried to bring evidence to the tribunal. That's when they turned on me, said I was spreading lies, undermining authority. They gave me a choice, recant everything or face exile." "And you chose exile." "No. I chose to keep my mouth shut." Kale's voice turned bitter. "I recanted, publicly. Said I was wrong, that Corvus's death was an accident. I thought if I played along I could stay with the pack, keep investigating quietly." "But they exiled you anyway." "Yeah. Turns out the council doesn't forgive questions, even when you apologize for asking them." He looked at her. "That's why I didn't walk away when the hunters offered me a deal. I already know what deals with the council are worth." Seren was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry for what they did to you." "Don't be. I made my choices. Now I'm making different ones." "Better ones?" "That remains to be seen." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down. Finally, Seren spoke again. "When we get the records, what happens after?" "We get them to people who can use them, journalists, independent tribunals, anyone with enough power to force the council to answer for what they've done. And if that doesn't work, then we keep fighting, keep exposing them, until people listen or we run out of options." "That's not much of a plan. It's the only one we've got." Seren pulled her knees to her chest. "What if we don't make it out? Then someone else will have to finish what we started." "That's a terrible answer." "It's a realistic one." She almost laughed. "You really are a pessimist. And you're an optimist who keeps walking into death traps. We balance each other out." This time she did laugh. It was short and sharp, but it was real. Kael found himself smiling again. "Get some sleep," he said. "We've got a long walk ahead of us." "What about you?" "I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too." "I'll sleep when we're not being hunted by the council." Seren opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She wrapped herself in her blanket and curled up near the fire. Within minutes, she was asleep. Kyle sat with his back against the cave wall and kept watch. The forest was quiet, too quiet. And somewhere out there, hunters were still looking for them. They reached the compound on the third day. It was exactly where Marin's map said it would be, built into the mountainside like a tumor. Gray stone walls, guard towers, a single main gate reinforced with iron. Kyle and Seren watched from the tree line, half a mile away. "It's bigger than I remembered," Seren said quietly. "How long were you in there?" 3 years, but they kept us in the lower levels. I never saw most of it." Kyle studied the compound through the gaps in the trees. Guards patrolled the walls. More guards at the gate. And probably dozens more inside. "The service entrance?" he asked. "South side, like I said." Seren pointed to a spot where the wall met the mountain. "There's a door there, small, easy to miss if you're not looking for it." "Guards?" "Not usually. It's just for deliveries, laundry, supplies. They don't think anyone would be stupid enough to break in through it. Lucky us. They waited until nightfall, watched the guard rotations, counted heads, looked for patterns. Midnight came and went. The guards changed shifts, just like Marin said they would. Now, Kael whispered. They moved fast and low, using the darkness and the terrain to stay hidden. The distance from the tree line to the compound wall felt like miles, but it was probably only a few hundred yards. They reached the wall without being seen. The service door was right where Saren said it would be. Small, wooden, with a simple lock. Can you pick it? Kael asked. Give me a minute. Saren pulled a thin piece of wire from her coat, the same one she'd used to escape her cell, and went to work. Kael kept watch, every nerve screaming that they were about to be discovered. But the seconds ticked by, and no alarm sounded. Then Saren said, "Got it." The lock clicked open. They slipped inside. The corridor beyond was dark, narrow, and smelled like soap and mildew. Storage rooms lined both sides, crates of supplies, barrels of water, racks of cleaning equipment. Empty. "This way," Saren whispered. They moved through the compound like shadows, avoiding the main corridors, sticking to the service passages that only the staff used. Twice they heard voices and had to duck into alcoves until the speakers passed. They reached the stairs without being seen. Third floor, east wing. Kael's heart was hammering so hard he was sure the guards could hear it. They climbed. The stairs creaked under their weight. Every sound felt like a gunshot in the silence. At the top, Saren held up a hand. "Guard!" Kael peered around the corner. Sure enough, a single guard stood outside a door at the end of the hall. He looked bored, half asleep. "The sleeping draft," Saren whispered. "We don't have a drink to put it in." "Then we do this the hard way." Before Kael could stop her, she stepped into the hallway. The guard's head snapped up. "Hey, who—" Saren smiled. "Sorry, I'm lost. Can you help me?" The guard frowned, but he started toward her. "You're not supposed to be—" Kael stepped out behind him and brought the hilt of his dagger down on the back of the guard's skull. The man dropped like a stone. "I had that under control," Saren said. "Sure you did." They dragged the unconscious guard into a side room and tied him up with the rope Marin had given them. Then they moved to the door he'd been guarding, locked. "Of course it is," Kael muttered. "I've got it." Saren went to work again. This lock took longer. 2 minutes, then 3. Kael's nerves were screaming. Someone was going to find them. Someone was going to raise the alarm. Then the lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside was a room filled with filing cabinets, dozens of them, each one crammed with folders and ledgers and documents. Years of evidence. "We can't carry all of this," Kael said. "We don't need all of it. Just enough to prove what they've been doing." Saren started pulling folders at random. Names, dates, experiment logs, medical records. Kael grabbed everything he could fit in the pack Marin had given them. They worked fast. 5 minutes. 10. Then they heard footsteps in the hallway. Kael and Saren froze. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then they stopped. Right outside the door. "Intruders!" The shout echoed through the compound. "Third floor, east wing." Bells started ringing. Alarms, shouts. Kael grabbed Saren's arm. "Run!" They bolted for the stairs. Behind them, guards poured into the hallway. Someone fired a crossbow. The bolt slammed into the wall inches from Kael's head. They hit the stairs and took them 3 at a time. Down, down. Saren stumbled, caught herself, kept going. More guards below, coming up. They were trapped. Saren grabbed Kael's hand. "Trust me?" "What are you—" She closed her eyes and unleashed her power, not to heal, to overwhelm. The wave of energy that burst from her was like a shock wave. Every guard within 50 feet dropped to their knees, gasping, clutching their heads. "Go!" Saren screamed. They ran, through the stunned guards, down the corridor, toward the service entrance. Behind them, someone was shouting orders. The compound was waking up, coming for them. They burst through the service door and into the night, and ran like hell. And ran like hell. The forest swallowed them in darkness, branches whipping their faces as they crashed through undergrowth. Behind them, the compound erupted, shouts, bells, the thunder of boots on stone. "They're coming," Saren gasped. "I know." Kael grabbed her hand and pulled her left, away from the main path. "This way." They scrambled up a rocky slope, feet sliding on loose stones. Kyle's lungs burned. The pack on his back felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Every folder inside suddenly precious as gold. A crossbow bolt whistled past his ear and shattered against a tree trunk. Too close. Down! He shoved Saren behind an outcropping just as another volley cut through the air where they'd been standing. How many? Saren's face was pale in the moonlight, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Kale risked a glance back. Torches. At least 20 of them, spreading out through the trees in a coordinated sweep. Too many. What do we do? We don't stop moving. They ran again. Uphill this time, toward the higher elevations where the trees thinned and the rocks grew sharper. It was harder terrain, but it would slow the pursuit, maybe buy them time, maybe get them killed. Saren stumbled. Kyle caught her before she went down, felt how badly she was shaking. The power she'd unleashed back in the compound had cost her. She was running on fumes now. I can't, she started. You can. Kyle pulled her arm over his shoulders, taking some of her weight. Just a little further. You don't know that. No, but I'm saying it anyway. Despite everything, she almost laughed. They kept climbing. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, not gone, just farther back. The hunters were being careful now, knowing their quarry was armed and desperate. Smart. That made them more dangerous. At the ridgeline, Kyle finally stopped. Saren collapsed against a boulder, gasping like she'd been drowning. Her face was gray, slick with sweat despite the freezing air. How bad? Kyle asked. I'm fine. Saren. She doubled over and retched. Nothing came up but bile. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. Using her power like that, not to heal but to harm, had torn something inside her. Kale could see it in the way she moved, the tremor in her hands. We need to keep moving, he said quietly. Can you walk? Do I have a choice? Not really. She pushed herself upright, wobbled, steadied. Then I can walk. They moved along the ridge, using the higher ground to stay ahead of the hunters. The moon was full enough to see by, which helped them, but also meant they could be seen. Double-edged sword. An hour passed, then 2. The pursuit sounds faded completely. Did we lose them? Saren asked. Maybe. Or maybe they're just regrouping. Kyle studied the terrain ahead. The ridge continued east for another mile before dropping into a valley. After that, neutral territory. Settlements that didn't answer to the council, if they could make it that far. We should rest, Saren said. Not yet. Kale. Not yet. They kept walking. Dawn broke cold and gray. The sky looked like dirty ice, clouds hanging low enough to touch. Snow started falling again, light at first, then heavier. Perfect cover and perfect misery. By midday, they descended into the valley. The trees here were different, older, thicker, dark pines that blocked out most of the light. The snow piled deep between them. Kale's legs felt like stone. Saren was barely conscious, moving on instinct alone. They needed shelter, food, rest. They needed a miracle. There, Saren said suddenly. Her voice was weak but urgent. That cabin. Kale looked. Through the trees, maybe 200 yards ahead, was a structure. Small, half-collapsed, probably abandoned years ago. It wasn't much, but it was something. They reached it and Kyle kicked the door in. The interior was freezing, the roof half gone, snow piled in one corner. But one room still had a ceiling, and there was an old fireplace that looked intact. Stay here, Kyle said. Saren didn't argue. She just sank to the floor and closed her eyes. Kyle gathered wood from the forest, dry branches from under the snow, bark stripped from dead trees. He built a fire the way his father had taught him 20 years ago, before the world got complicated. Tinder. Kindling. Patience. The flames caught, grew. Heat filled the small room like a living thing. Saren shifted closer to the fire, still not speaking. Kale pulled out the dried meat from their supplies and forced her to eat. She chewed mechanically, swallowed, kept her eyes on the flames. We got it, she said finally. Yeah. The evidence. We actually got it. We did. So why doesn't it feel like winning? Kyle knew what she meant. They had the files. Proof of everything the council had done. Names, dates, experiments, casualties. It was enough to bring the whole corrupt system crashing down. But they were still hunted, still alone, still barely alive. Because we're not done yet, Kyle said. Getting the evidence was just step one. What's step two? Making sure it gets to the right people. And step three? Surviving long enough to see what happens after. Seren was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I want to go back. Kyle looked at her. What? To the compound. I want to go back. Are you insane? We barely made it out alive. I know. Her eyes were bright in the firelight, not feverish, determined. But the others are still there, the other Omegas, 11 people still trapped in that place. We can't save them. Why not? Because there are 20 guards between us and them, and we're 2 people with a pack full of stolen documents. Kale kept his voice level. We did what we came to do. We got the evidence. Now we need to get it somewhere safe before the council finds us and destroys it. Those people have been waiting for 3 years for someone to help them. And they'll have to wait a little longer. Seren's jaw tightened. You don't understand. I understand just fine. You feel guilty. You got out and they didn't. So now you want to go back and play hero. That's not... It is. Kyle leaned forward. And I get it. I do. But throwing your life away won't save them. Getting this evidence to people who can use it, that might actually make a difference. You don't know that. No. But I know walking back into that compound is suicide. They stared at each other across the fire. Finally, Seren looked away. Maybe you're right. I am right. But I still hate it. I know. She pulled her knees to her chest and stared into the flames. Tell me it'll be worth it. All of this. Tell me we're not doing this for nothing. Kale wanted to tell her what she wanted to hear, that everything would work out, that justice would prevail, that the good guys would win in the end. But he'd learned a long time ago that the world didn't work that way. I don't know if it'll be worth it, he said honestly. But I know it's the right thing to do, and sometimes that has to be enough. Seren didn't respond, just sat there, looking smaller than ever, wrapped in a blanket that was more holes than fabric. Kale stood and moved to the window, or what was left of it. The snow was falling harder now, covering their tracks. That was good, made them harder to follow, but it also meant they were trapped here until the storm passed. He was about to turn back when he saw movement in the trees. His whole body went rigid. Seren. What? We have company. She was on her feet instantly, all exhaustion forgotten. Where? North, maybe 100 yards out. They watched together. The movement resolved into shapes, people, at least 6 of them moving through the trees with the careful precision of trained hunters. Council? Seren whispered. Has to be. How did they find us? Doesn't matter. Kyle grabbed the pack. We need to go. Now. They slipped out the back of the cabin just as the hunters reached the front. Kyle heard voices, orders being given. Then the sound of the door being kicked in. He and Seren ran. The storm worked in their favor, obscuring their tracks almost as fast as they made them. But it also made running treacherous. Kale's foot caught on something hidden under the snow, and he went down hard, the pack flying from his hands. Kyle! Seren skidded to a stop. I'm fine. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed the pack. Keep moving. They crashed through the forest, pursued by shouts and the occasional crossbow bolt that punched into trees around them. The hunters were getting closer, organized, herding them like animals. Left! Kyle veered toward a narrow ravine. It was a risk. If it was too steep, they'd be trapped. But if they could get down fast enough, they might lose their pursuers. The slope was nearly vertical. Kyle didn't hesitate. He grabbed Seren's hand and jumped. They slid more than climbed, boots scraping against rock and ice. Seren yelped as a sharp edge tore through her coat. Kyle's shoulder slammed into an outcropping hard enough to make his vision blur, but they reached the bottom alive. Above them, the hunters appeared at the ravine's edge. One of them raised a crossbow. Kyle grabbed Seren and dove behind a boulder, just as the bolt struck where they'd been standing. We can't keep running, Seren gasped. I know. So what do we do? Kale's mind raced. They were outmanned, outgunned, and running out of places to hide. The pack full of evidence weighed heavy in his hands. Evidence that would die with them if they didn't figure something out fast. Then he saw it. Carved into the rock wall of the ravine, barely visible under years of erosion. A symbol. Old, pre-council. The kind smugglers and rebels used to mark safe routes. This way. He pulled Saren toward the wall. What are you doing? Hoping I'm right. He ran his hands along the rock face, searching. There, a seam. He dug his fingers in and pulled. A section of the wall swung inward. A hidden passage. Inside! Kael shoved Saren through and followed, pulling the door shut behind them. Darkness swallowed them whole. They stood there, not breathing, listening to the hunters reach the bottom of the ravine. Footsteps. Voices. Right outside. Where'd they go? Check the rocks. They couldn't have gotten far. The voices moved away, searching in the wrong direction. Kael let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. We need light. I can't see anything. Hold on. He fumbled in the pack, found the small lantern Marin had included in their supplies. It took 3 tries to get it lit with shaking hands, but eventually a weak flame sputtered to life. The passage stretched ahead of them, carved through solid rock. Ancient, probably used during the border wars decades ago. Where does it go? Saren asked. No idea, but anywhere's better than here. They walked. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow they had to move sideways, sometimes opening into small chambers that echoed their footsteps. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The air smelled like old stone and earth. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the passage ended at a ladder. Kael looked up. Light filtered down from above. Not sunlight, but something artificial. Firelight, maybe. Stay close, he whispered. He climbed. The ladder was old but solid, rungs worn smooth by generations of hands. At the top was a trapdoor. Kael pressed his ear against it, listening. Voices. Faint. Multiple people. He eased the door open an inch. They were in a cellar. Above them, floorboards. And beyond that, the sound of conversation. A lot of conversation. Kael pushed the door open wider and pulled himself up. Saren followed. The cellar was full of supplies, crates of food, barrels of water, weapons stacked against the walls. More weapons than any normal household would need. Where are we? Saren whispered. Kael didn't know, but whoever owned this place was either preparing for war or already fighting one. He moved to the stairs and climbed carefully. At the top, a door. Unlocked. He opened it. The room beyond was full of people. At least 30 of them gathered around tables, talking in low, urgent voices. Maps spread out between them, weapons within easy reach. They looked up as one when Kael stepped through the door. Every single one of them went for their weapons. Wait! Kael held up his hands. We're not council. Then who the hell are you? The voice came from a woman at the center table. Mid-40s, scarred face, eyes like flint. A leader. Refugees, Kael said. We're running from the council. We used the old passage. We didn't know it would lead here. The woman studied him. Then her eyes shifted to Saren, who'd come up behind him. Her expression changed. You. Saren froze. Do I know you? No, but I know what you are. The woman stood. You're one of the stolen Omegas, the ones the council's been using. How did you? Because my son was one of the guards at that compound. He told me what was happening before the council killed him for talking. The woman's voice was hard. He said there was a healer, dark hair, green eyes, said she was the one who kept the others alive when the council tried to work them to death. Saren said nothing. Is it true? The woman pressed. Are you her? Yes. The room erupted, people shouting questions, demanding answers. The woman raised her hand and silence fell. My name is Thera Blackwood, she said, and you've just walked into the one place in this kingdom where the council doesn't reach. She gestured to the people around her. We're the resistance. Kael's mind spun. He'd heard rumors of organized opposition to the council, dismissed them as wishful thinking. Apparently he'd been wrong. We need your help, Saren said. We need yours more. Thera moved closer. If you can prove what the council's been doing, if you have evidence, we can use it. We have contacts in the capital, journalists who will publish the truth, magistrates who aren't on the council's payroll. We can make this matter. We have evidence. Kael held up the pack. Files, medical records, everything. Thera's eyes widened. You got into the compound? We got in, and we got out. Then you're either the bravest or the stupidest people I've ever met. She paused. Probably both. We need to get this evidence to someone who can use it, Kael said. Someone the council can't silence. I can do that. Thera held out her hand. Give it to me. I'll make sure it reaches the right people. Kael hesitated. Seren put her hand on his arm. We can trust her. How do you know? Because if she wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. Fair point. Kael handed over the pack. Thera opened it and pulled out the first folder. Her expression hardened as she read. Then she passed it to the person next to her, who read it and passed it on. The room grew silent as the evidence circulated. Finally, Thera spoke. This is worse than we thought. How bad? Someone asked. Bad enough that when this gets out, the council won't survive it. Thera looked at Kael and Seren. You've given us a weapon. Now we need to use it before the council realizes what we have. How long? Kael asked. 3 days. Maybe 4. We'll copy the documents, distribute them to our contacts, and make sure they all publish simultaneously. The council won't be able to stop them all. And then? Then we see what happens when you shine light on monsters that have been hiding in the dark. It was the best plan Kael had heard in years. There's something else, Seren said. The other Omegas. The ones still in the compound. We have to get them out. Thera shook her head. That's not our priority right now. It has to be. Seren's voice was steel. If the council realizes we took the files, they'll destroy the evidence, and that means destroying the witnesses. She's right, Kael said. The council will kill everyone in that compound the second they figure out what we took. Thera was quiet for a long moment. Then she cursed. How many? 11 Omegas, 20 guards, maybe more by now. We don't have the numbers for a direct assault. We don't need numbers. Seren stepped forward. We need a distraction, something big enough to pull the guards away from the lower levels where the Omegas are kept. Like what? Seren looked at Kael, then back at Thera. Like me. No, Kael said immediately. It's the only way. It's suicide. Maybe. Seren's jaw was set. But those people are still there because I left them behind. I'm not doing it again. You didn't leave them behind. You escaped. There's a difference. Not to me. Thera watched them argue. Then she said, What exactly are you proposing? Seren turned to her. I go back. Alone. I turn myself in. Tell them I'll cooperate if they guarantee the safety of the others. They'll never agree to that, Kael said. They will if they think they can use me. Seren's eyes were bright. I'm the strongest healer they had. They wanted to weaponize my abilities. If I offer to work with them voluntarily, they'll take the deal. And then? And then you come get me, and everyone else. Thera leaned back. That's the stupidest plan I've ever heard. I know, Seren said, but it'll work. How? Because they won't expect it. They'll think I broke, that I'm surrendering. They'll let their guard down. She looked at Kael. That's when you hit them. With what army? Kael demanded. We have 30 people here. The compound has 80 guards minimum. Then we make them think we have more. Thera was starting to smile. We stage attacks on the perimeter, multiple locations, spread them thin. While they're distracted, a small team goes in through the service entrance, gets to the lower levels, and pulls everyone out. That could actually work, someone said. It's still insane, Kael said. Everything we've done has been insane. Seren grabbed his hands. But it's worked so far. We've gotten lucky. Then we get lucky one more time. Kael wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that there had to be another way. But looking at her face, at the determination and the fear and the hope all mixed together, he knew she'd made up her mind. And maybe she was right. Maybe the only way to save people was to stop playing it safe. Fine, he said, but I'm the one who comes to get you. Kael, non-negotiable. You want to walk back into hell, I'm the one who drags you out. Seren's eyes were shining. Okay. Thera clapped her hands once. Then we have a plan. Seren turns herself in tomorrow at dawn, gives us time to get into position. We start the distractions at noon. Small team goes in through the service entrance at 12:15. Everyone out by 12:30. That's a 15-minute window, Kyle said. Then you better move fast. Chatted. They spent the night preparing. Thera's people were efficient, professional. They armed Kyle with a proper sword, a crossbow, and armor that actually fit. They gave him maps of the compound, guard schedules, contingency plans. They treated him like he was one of them. It felt strange, good strange. Seren spent the time writing, letters to each of the Omegas still in the compound. Apologies. Promises. Hope. Kale found her in a corner room, bent over a table, her hand moving across paper. You should rest, he'd said. I can't. Try anyway. She set down the pen and looked at him. I'm scared. I know. What if it doesn't work? What if I get there and they just kill me? They won't. How do you know? Because you're too valuable to kill. Kale sat across from her. And because I won't let them. You can't promise that. Watch me. She almost smiled. Then the smile faded. If something goes wrong, if I don't make it out, you will. But if I don't, promise me you'll finish this. Get the evidence out. Make sure people know what happened. Seren, promise me. Kyle looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd stumbled into his cabin 3 weeks ago more dead than alive, who'd survived things that should have broken her, who refused to stop fighting even when the fight seemed hopeless. I promise, he said. Thank you. They sat in silence for a while. Then Seren said, I'm glad it was you in the cabin that night. I'm glad it was you who found me. Yeah? Yeah. She reached across the table and took his hand. You gave me something I thought I'd lost. What's that? A reason to keep going. Kale squeezed her hand. You did the same for me. Dawn came too fast. They stood at the edge of the forest, looking at the compound in the distance. Behind them, Thera's people were already moving into position, staging points around the perimeter, waiting for the signal. You ready? Kyle asked. No, Seren said. But I'm doing it anyway. She started walking, alone, toward the main gate. Kyle watched her go, his heart in his throat. This was the worst plan they'd ever had, and it was the only one that mattered. Seren reached the gate. The guards saw her, shouted, raised their weapons. She raised her hands in surrender. The gates opened, and Seren Ashfall walked back into hell. Kale forced himself to turn away before the gates closed behind her. Every instinct screamed at him to run after her, to drag her back, to find literally any other plan that didn't involve her surrendering to the people who'd tortured her for 3 years. But he didn't move, because this was her choice, and taking that away from her would make him no better than the council. Come on. Thera's hand landed on his shoulder. We've got work to do. They moved back through the forest to the staging point, a rocky outcrop half a mile from the compound's eastern wall. 20 of Thera's people were already there, checking weapons, reviewing the plan one last time. Kale strapped on the armor they'd given him. It fit better than anything he'd worn in years. Real steel, not the scraps he'd cobbled together in exile. A sword at his hip that had actual balance. A crossbow with bolts that flew straight. He felt like a soldier again. He'd forgotten what that felt like. You know the timing? Thera asked. Noon, you start the diversions, 12:15, we go in. The service entrance will be your best bet. Should still be lightly guarded if the diversions work. And if they don't, then you improvise. Thera's smile was grim. You've gotten good at that. Not by choice. The best skills never are. She moved away to brief her team. Kale found a spot against a boulder and sat, trying to calm his racing mind. They had hours before the attack. Hours of waiting while Seren was inside that place, alone, at the mercy of people who saw her as property. He checked his weapons for the 3rd time. Sword sharp. Crossbow loaded. Backup dagger strapped to his calf. Everything ready except his nerves. You care about her. Kyle looked up. One of Thera's people, a younger man, maybe 25, with a scar across his cheek, stood nearby. What gave it away? Kyle asked. The way you watch the compound, like you're trying to see through the walls. The man sat down beside him. I'm Devin. Lost my sister to the program 2 years ago. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just make sure we get them all out. Devon pulled a whetstone from his pack and started sharpening his blade. Thera says you used to be Alpha. That true? Used to be. What happened? I asked the wrong questions. Devon nodded like he understood. The council doesn't like questions. They like obedience. Yeah, I figured that out too late. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the whetstone steady and rhythmic. Finally, Devon said, She'll be all right. The Omega. Thera says she's tough. She is. Then trust that. Trust her. Kael wanted to, but trust didn't stop crossbow bolts or torture or any of the 100 ways the council could hurt Seren before he reached her. Inside the compound, Seren was trying very hard not to panic. They'd put her in chains the moment she walked through the gate, heavy iron shackles that bit into her wrists and ankles. 2 guards hauled her through corridors she remembered too well, past the holding cells, past the medical wing, past the rooms where they'd broken people who tried to resist. They threw her into a cell and locked the door. The room was exactly as she remembered, 6 feet by 8, stone walls, a cot that was more wood than mattress, a bucket in the corner, no windows. She'd spent 3 years in rooms like this. Coming back felt like drowning. Well, well, the voice came from beyond the bars. The little healer returns. Seren looked up. Commander Vex stood in the hallway, arms crossed, expression somewhere between amused and furious. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. He'd been the one in charge of the program, the one who'd ordered the experiments, the one who'd watched without expression while people screamed. Seren had dreamed of killing him 1,000 times. Commander, she said, keeping her voice level. I have to admit I'm surprised. Vex stepped closer to the bars. After your dramatic escape, I assumed you'd run as far as possible. Instead, you walked back through our front gate. I'm here to make a deal. A deal? Vex laughed. You're in chains in my compound and you think you have leverage to negotiate? I do, because I know what you want. Enlighten me. Seren stood, keeping her expression calm even though her heart was hammering. This was it, the moment where her plan either worked or got her killed. You want a weapon, she said. A healer strong enough to keep soldiers fighting indefinitely. Someone who can turn the tide of battles just by being there. She paused. I'm the strongest healer you've ever had. You know it. I know it. That's why you've been hunting me. Vex's expression didn't change. Continue. I'll work with you, voluntarily. No more chains, no more cells. I'll use my abilities however you want. In exchange for the other Omegas, you let them go, all of them, unharmed. Vex was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was not a kind smile. You think I'm stupid enough to believe you'd cooperate willingly? I think you're smart enough to know that a willing healer is more useful than a broken one. Seren kept her voice steady. You can keep torturing people until they break. Or you can have one person who'll give you everything you want without a fight. And what's to stop you from running the moment we release the others? Nothing, except that I'm offering you something worth more than 11 traumatized Omegas who can barely stand. Vex studied her. She could see him calculating, weighing the options. Finally, he said, I'll consider your offer, after you demonstrate your abilities. Demonstrate how? We have wounded soldiers, critical injuries. If you can save them, prove you're as powerful as you claim, I'll discuss terms. It was a trap. Seren knew it was a trap. The moment she used her power, she'd be showing them exactly how much she was worth. They'd never let her go after that. But she needed time. Needed to keep them believing she was cooperating long enough for Kael and Thera's people to get into position. Fine, she said. Bring them in. Vex smiled. Excellent. Outside, the morning crawled toward noon with agonizing slowness. Kael had given up trying to sit still. He paced the staging area, checked his weapons again, reviewed the compound layout until he could navigate it blind. Thera's people watched him with a mixture of sympathy and amusement. First time leading a rescue? Devon asked. First time leading anything in 3 years. You'll be fine, muscle memory and all that. Right. Kael didn't feel fine. He felt like every mistake he'd ever made was about to catch up with him at once. At 11:30, Thera gathered everyone together. Listen up, she said. We've got one shot at this. The diversions start at noon, explosions on the north and west walls, fires in the storage buildings, anything to make them think we're launching a full assault. That pulls their forces away from the interior. How long will that last? Someone asked. 20 minutes if we're lucky, 15 if we're not. Thera looked at Kael. That's your window. Get in, get to the lower levels, grab everyone you can, and get out. Don't stop. Don't fight unless you have to. Just move. Kael nodded. Who's coming with me? Devin, Marcus, and Lena. 3 of my best. Thera pointed to each in turn. They know the service entrance. They'll get you inside. And the Omega? Devin asked. Where will she be? No idea, Thera admitted. But Kael will find her. Won't you? Yes, Kael said. There was no other option. At 11:50, they moved into position. Kael and his team circled around to the south side of the compound, staying low, using the terrain for cover. The service entrance was exactly where Seren had said it would be. A small wooden door built into the stone wall, half hidden by overgrown bushes. Unguarded. Too easy, Marcus muttered. He was older than the others, scarred and weathered, with the look of someone who'd seen too many battles. Maybe they don't think anyone's stupid enough to attack during daylight, Lena said. She was young, quick, with a crossbow that looked like an extension of her arms. They're about to find out otherwise, Devin said. Noon hit. On the north wall, an explosion shook the ground, then another on the west side. Flames shot into the sky. Alarms started ringing inside the compound, bells, horns, shouting. The diversions had started. Go! Kael ran for the service entrance. Devin was already there, working the lock with practiced hands. It clicked open in seconds. They slipped inside. The corridor beyond was empty, exactly as Seren had described. Storage rooms lined both sides. No guards in sight. They'd all been pulled to deal with the attacks. Lower levels, Kael whispered. This way. They moved fast and quiet, weapons ready. Twice they heard footsteps and had to duck into side rooms until the guards passed. But the compound was chaos. Everyone running toward the explosions, trying to organize a defense. No one looking for threats from the inside. They reached the stairs and descended. 1 level, 2, 3. The air grew colder, damper. The smell changed, less stone and oil, more mildew, and something worse. Suffering. The holding cells were on the 4th sublevel. Kael recognized them from the maps. A long corridor with cells on both sides, each one barely big enough for a person to lie down. And in those cells, people, they were in bad shape, thin, pale, some conscious, some not, but alive. We're here to get you out, Kael said to the first cell. Inside, a young woman stared at him with hollow eyes. Can you walk? She nodded slowly. Devin was already picking the lock. It opened and the woman stumbled out, nearly falling. Lena caught her. Get them all, Kael ordered. They moved down the corridor, opening cells one by one. 11 Omegas total, just like Seren had said. Some could walk on their own. Others needed help. But they were all conscious enough to understand what was happening. Where's Seren? One of them asked, a man, maybe 30, with burns on his arms. She's here somewhere, Kael said. I'm going to find her. You're going with them. He pointed to Devin and the others. They'll get you out. We're not leaving without her, another Omega said. A woman with steel in her voice despite her condition. You are, Kael said, because that's what she'd want. Trust me. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Find her. I will. Devin grabbed Kael's arm. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they realize what's happening. You need to move fast. I know. If you're not at the rendezvous in 15 minutes, we leave without you. Understood. Kael watched them shepherd the Omegas back toward the stairs. Then he turned and ran deeper into the compound. Seren was in the medical wing, surrounded by dying men. Vex had kept his word, brought her 4 soldiers with injuries that should have killed them hours ago. Shrapnel wounds, internal bleeding, burns that covered half their bodies. Save them, he'd said. Prove what you can do. So she had. She'd poured her power into each one, feeling their injuries like they were her own. Knitting flesh. Mending organs. Pulling them back from the edge of death, one excruciating piece at a time. It was exhausting, painful, like running a marathon while someone stabbed her repeatedly. But it worked. One by one, the soldiers opened their eyes, sat up, stared at her like she was a miracle. Vex watched with cold satisfaction. Impressive. Saren swayed, catching herself against the table. Your end of the deal. Of course, Vex nodded to the guards. Release the Omegas, all of them. Saren's heart leaped. It had worked. Her insane plan had actually worked. Then Vex added, after we secure our new asset. The guards grabbed her arms before she could react. Saren tried to pull away, but her legs gave out, her body too drained from the healing. You promised, she gasped. I promised to consider your offer. I've considered it. Vex leaned closer. Here's my counteroffer. You work for us, permanently, and in exchange, the other Omegas die quickly instead of slowly. No. Guards, take her to the secure wing. Double shackles. I don't want her lifting a finger without permission. They dragged her toward the door. And that's when the real explosion started. Not the diversions outside, something bigger, closer. The compound shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere, something was burning. What the hell? Vex started. Then Kale burst through the door. He took in the scene in a heartbeat. Saren in chains, Vex giving orders, guards moving to intercept. His sword was in his hand before anyone could react. The first guard went down with a blade through his shoulder. The second caught a crossbow bolt in the leg. Kale moved like violence itself, every motion efficient and brutal. Saren, run! But she couldn't run, could barely stand. The guard still had her arms. Kyle changed direction mid-strike, slamming into the guards holding her. They went down in a tangle. Saren fell hard, chains rattling. Get her, Vex shouted. More guards poured into the room. 6, 8, too many. Kyle fought like a man possessed. His sword flashed, catching one guard across the chest, another in the arm. He spun, ducked a blade that would have taken his head off, came up with his dagger and buried it in someone's gut. But there were too many. A club caught him across the back. He stumbled. Another blow to his ribs, his vision blurred. Kyle! Saren screamed. He went down. The guards surrounded him, weapons raised. Vex stepped forward, smiling. The exile. I should have known you'd be involved in this. Kale spat blood. You should have killed me when you had the chance. I'm about to correct that mistake. Vex drew his own sword. And that's when Saren stopped holding back. She'd been conserving her power, trying to keep enough in reserve to heal herself later. But watching Kyle about to die erased every careful calculation. She unleashed everything. The wave of power that burst from her wasn't healing. It was pure, uncontrolled energy that slammed into every person in the room like a physical force. Guards dropped to their knees, gasping. Vex staggered backward, his sword clattering to the floor. The soldiers she'd just healed collapsed, overwhelmed. Kyle, partially shielded by his proximity to Saren, managed to stay conscious, barely. Go, Saren gasped. Get out, now! Not without you. I can't walk. Kale grabbed her, threw her over his shoulder, and ran. Behind them, Vex was shouting orders through the chaos. Guards were recovering, giving chase. But Kyle had a head start. He ran through corridors he half remembered from the maps, Saren's weight on his shoulder, his ribs screaming from where they'd hit him. Every breath was agony. Every step felt like his legs would give out. But he didn't stop. He found the stairs. Went up. 1 level. 2. Footsteps behind them. Close. There! A guard at the end of the corridor raising a crossbow. Kyle dove through a doorway as the bolt whistled past. He kicked the door shut, shoved a table against it. They were in some kind of office. 1 window, 3 stories up. Can you heal me? He asked Saren. I don't have anything left. Then hold on. He grabbed a chair and smashed it through the window. Glass exploded outward. Are you insane? Saren asked. Probably. The door shook as guards slammed into it from the outside. The table wouldn't hold long. Kale looked out the window. There. A ledge, maybe 2 feet wide, running along the wall. And beyond that, a drainage pipe that led down. It was barely possible, which meant they were doing it. Close your eyes, he said. What? He climbed out the window with her still on his shoulder. The ledge was narrower than it looked. His boots barely fit. The wind up here was vicious, trying to tear them loose. Behind them, the door splintered. Kyle didn't look back. He moved along the ledge, each step careful, reaching for the drainage pipe. His fingers closed around it. He tested it. It held. "Hold on," he told Seren. Then he jumped. They slid down the pipe in a barely controlled fall, boots scraping metal, Kael's hands burning as he tried to slow their descent. They hit the ground hard. Kael's legs nearly buckled, but he kept his feet. "Service entrance," Seren gasped. "South side." Kael ran. Guards were pouring out of the main gate now, responding to the chaos. But they were looking for attackers from outside, not escapees from within. Kael reached the service entrance. The door was open. Devon and the others had left it that way. He ran through it and into the forest. Behind them, alarms were still ringing, guards shouting, the compound in complete chaos. But ahead, through the trees, he saw people. Devon and the others, with 11 freed Omegas stumbling through the snow. "Move!" Kael shouted. "They're right behind us." The group ran. Kael caught up, still carrying Seren, his lungs burning. They crashed through the forest, pursued by shouts and crossbow bolts. One bolt caught a tree next to Kael's head. Another hit the ground at his feet. But the forest was thick here. The snow made it hard for the guards to move quickly, and Thera's people knew these woods. They reached a ravine, different from the one Kael and Seren had found before. Devon pointed to a rope bridge spanning it. "Across! Now!" They ran across one by one, the bridge swaying dangerously. Behind them, guards were closing in. The last Omega made it across. Then Lana, Marcus, Devon. Kael stepped onto the bridge with Seren. "Cut it!" Devon shouted. Marcus drew his sword and hacked at the ropes on their side. Kael was halfway across when the bridge lurched. The ropes on the far side were fraying, snapping one by one. "Faster!" Seren screamed. Kael ran. The bridge tilted. He leaped the last 10 feet, hit the ground hard, rolled. Behind them, the bridge collapsed into the ravine. The guards on the other side skidded to a stop, unable to follow. They'd made it. Kael lay there gasping, Seren still in his arms. Around them, freed Omegas were crying, holding each other, staring at the sky like they couldn't believe it was real. They were out. They were free. "Is everyone all right?" Devon was doing a head count. "We're here," one of the Omegas said. "We're all here." 11 freed prisoners, 4 rescuers, all alive. Against every odd, they'd actually pulled it off. Seren looked up at Kael. "We did it. You did it," he said. "This was your plan. Our plan." "Semantics," she laughed. It was weak and exhausted and the most beautiful sound Kael had ever heard. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Not a chance." "Then I'm carrying you the rest of the way." "My hero." "Shut up." They moved through the forest, slower now, but steady. The compound alarms were fading behind them. No more pursuit. Thera's diversions had worked, pulled too many guards away, created too much chaos for an organized chase. By the time they reached the resistance stronghold, it was almost evening. Thera met them at the entrance, her face splitting into a rare smile when she saw the freed Omegas. "You actually did it," she said. "We had a good plan," Kael said. "You had an insane plan. But it worked." She gestured to her people. "Get them inside. Food, water, medical attention, everything they need." The Omegas filed in, helped by resistance members. Some were crying, some were silent. All of them looked like they'd seen the world change in a single day. Because they had. Thera pulled Kael aside. "The evidence hit the capital 2 hours ago." Kael's heart jumped. And every major newspaper is running with it. Eyewitness accounts, medical records, the names of council members involved. Thera's smile widened. "The kingdom's in an uproar. There are protests in the streets, calls for the council to answer for what they've done." "Will they?" "They don't have a choice, not anymore." Thera looked at the freed Omegas being led inside. "You gave them witnesses, living proof. The council can't bury this." Kael felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope. Real hope. For the first time in years. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we make sure those council bastards face justice." Thera clapped him on the shoulder. "You started something today. Something that can't be stopped." Inside, Seren was being examined by one of Thera's healers, a kind-faced older woman who clucked disapprovingly at her condition but didn't ask questions. Kael sat down beside her. "How are you feeling?" Like I got hit by a mountain. That's fair. But we did it. We actually got them out. We did. Seren took his hand. Thank you for coming back for me. I promised I would. I know. But thank you anyway. They sat there in comfortable silence while the world outside began to change. 3 days later, the council was called before an emergency tribunal. Representatives from every major settlement in the kingdom were present. And so were the witnesses. 11 freed Omegas standing in front of the council that had stolen years of their lives. Seren stood at the front, her voice steady as she recounted everything. The abductions, the experiments, the deaths. Beside her, the other Omegas added their testimonies. Name after name, crime after crime. Until the weight of truth was too heavy for even the council to bear. Commander Vex tried to deny everything, claimed the Omegas were lying, that the documents were forged. But there were too many witnesses, too much evidence, too much rage from a kingdom that had finally seen what monsters had been ruling them. The verdict came down swift and brutal, guilty. Every council member involved in the program was stripped of rank and sentenced to life imprisonment. The program itself was dismantled. The compound was to be destroyed, erased from existence. And Kael's exile was officially overturned. He stood in the tribunal hall and listened to the announcement with something like disbelief. After 3 years of being forgotten, he was being welcomed back. But he didn't feel triumphant, just tired. Outside the hall, Seren found him. They're calling you a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who did the right thing, finally. That's what heroes are. Kael shook his head. I spent 3 years doing nothing while people suffered. That doesn't make me a hero. No, but what you did in the last 3 weeks does. Seren smiled. Take the win, Kael. You earned it. Maybe she was right. Maybe sometimes doing the right thing, even late, even scared, even broken, was enough. That night, there was celebration in the Resistance stronghold. Food, drink, music. People laughing for the first time in what felt like years. Kael found himself pulled into conversations, thanked by people he'd never met, treated like he mattered. It felt strange. Good strange. Across the room, Seren was surrounded by the freed Omegas, all of them talking and crying and holding each other like they were afraid this was a dream they'd wake up from. She caught Kael's eye and smiled. He smiled back. They had done it. Against every odd, every obstacle, every reason to give up, they'd actually done it. The exile and the escaped Omega had broken a kingdom's darkest secret wide open, and nothing would ever be the same. And nothing would ever be the same. The celebration lasted into the early hours, but Kael slipped out before midnight. The noise and warmth were good, necessary even, but he needed air, needed to think. He found himself on the ridge overlooking the valley, the same place where he and Seren had first stopped running weeks ago. The compound was visible in the distance, dark now, abandoned, waiting to be demolished. Good riddance. Thought I'd find you here. Kael turned. Seren stood a few feet away, wrapped in a thick coat, her breath misting in the cold air. You should be inside, he said, celebrating with the others. I celebrated enough. She moved to stand beside him. Besides, they're telling stories about what happened, making it sound more heroic than it was. It was pretty heroic. It was desperate and stupid, and we almost died 6 different ways. That too. Kael smiled. But we didn't die. And we won. Seren was quiet for a moment, staring at the compound. Do you think it's really over? The program? Yeah. The council made sure of that when they sentenced Vex and the others. I mean all of it. The corruption, the abuse of power. Do you think this actually changes anything, or will someone else just fill the void? It was a fair question, one Kael had been asking himself. I don't know, he admitted, but I think we gave people something they didn't have before. What's that? Proof that the system can be challenged, that ordinary people, broken people, discarded people, can stand up and make a difference. He looked at her. You did that. You showed them it was possible. We did that. Semantics. She laughed softly. Then her expression grew serious. What happens now, to you? What do you mean? Your exile's been overturned. You could go back, reclaim your position, return to your old life. Kael considered that. His old life, his old pack, the world he'd been forced to leave 3 years ago. The thought made his chest tight. I don't think I want to go back, he said slowly. That person, the Alpha I was, he's gone. I'm not sure I want to resurrect him. Then who do you want to be? I don't know yet. Kael turned to face her fully. What about you? What happens to Sarah and Ashfall now? She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. I spent 3 years being someone's prisoner, someone's tool. Then I spent weeks being a fugitive. I don't know how to just exist without running or hiding or fighting. You'll figure it out. Will I? You survived everything they threw at you. I think you can handle peacetime. Seren smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I want to do something that matters. The other Omegas, they're going to need help, support, someone who understands what they went through. You want to help them rebuild. Someone has to, and I'm probably the only one who knows exactly what they're dealing with. She paused. Thera offered me a place in the Resistance, said they could use someone with my abilities and my perspective. That's good, is it? Or am I just finding another fight to throw myself into because I don't know how to stop? Kael understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. Maybe it's both. Maybe you need the fight right now, until you figure out who you are without it. And when I figure that out, then you choose something new, or you keep fighting, whatever feels right. Seren looked at him with those green eyes that had seen too much and still refused to look away. You're staying with the Resistance too, aren't you? For now. They need people who know how the Council operates, how to dismantle the systems that enabled this. He shrugged. Besides, I don't have anywhere else to be. You could go anywhere now, do anything. So could you. I asked you first, Kael smiled. I'm staying because this isn't finished. We exposed one program, but there are others. Other abuses. Other injustices the Council's been hiding. He met her gaze. And because someone I respect once told me that sitting around doing nothing makes you complicit. Sounds like a wise person. She has her moments. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear between the clouds. The wind carried the distant sounds of celebration from the stronghold, music and laughter, and the sound of people remembering what hope felt like. Thank you, Seren said quietly, for everything, for not turning me away that night, for believing me, for fighting with me. You don't need to thank me. I do, because you didn't have to help. You could have left me to freeze in that cabin and none of this would have touched you. Yeah. And I'd still be alone in those mountains, waiting to die. Kael turned to her. You gave me something worth fighting for. That's worth more than safety. Seren's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm glad it was you, in that cabin. I'm glad you were the one who found me. Me too. She stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. Kael held her, feeling her shake slightly, not from cold, but from everything they'd survived together. We're going to be okay, she whispered. Aren't we? Yeah, Kael said. We are. And for the first time in years, he believed it. 2 weeks later, the summons came. Not from the council, they were too busy trying to salvage what was left of their reputation, but from the regional magistrates who'd taken over governance while the kingdom figured out what came next. They wanted to see Kael and Seren, officially. This feels like a trap, Seren said as they walked through the capital's gates. If it is, at least we'll go down swinging, Kael replied. The capital was different than the last time Kael had seen it. The streets were fuller, louder. People gathered in squares talking openly about things that would have gotten them arrested a month ago. Newspapers plastered on walls showed the faces of convicted council members, their crimes listed in damning detail. The kingdom was angry, and anger, properly directed, could rebuild the world. The magistrates' hall was impressive, all marble and high ceilings, and the weight of authority. Kael had stood in rooms like this before, back when he was Alpha, back when he thought following the rules meant something. Now he knew better. They were led into a large chamber where 3 magistrates sat behind an elevated desk. An audience filled the benches, citizens, journalists, former council supporters looking nervous. And standing off to one side, looking uncomfortable but present, were the 11 freed Omegas. Magistrate Chen, a severe woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood. Kale Varin and Seren Ashfall, you've been called here today to answer questions regarding the events at the Northern Compound and the subsequent exposure of the Omega exploitation program. Are we on trial? Kyle asked. Altin. No. You're here to give testimony, to help us understand the full scope of what occurred and how we prevent it from happening again. Then ask your questions. For the next 2 hours they did. Chen and her fellow magistrates asked about everything: how Seren escaped, how they met, how they obtained the evidence, how they executed the rescue. Kyle and Seren answered honestly, leaving nothing out. The audience listened in rapt silence. Some looked horrified. Some looked angry. None looked away. When the questions finally stopped, Magistrate Chen stood again. "The kingdom owes you both a debt," she said. "What you uncovered, what you survived, has fundamentally changed how we view governance and accountability. The council operated in shadows because no one dared challenge them. You proved that even shadows can't hide from determined light." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Your exile, Kale Varin, has been formally overturned, all records expunged. In Seren Ashfall, you and the other victims of the program will receive full reparations, medical care, and whatever support you need to rebuild your lives." It was more than Kyle had expected, but Seren stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "With respect, Magistrate, reparations aren't enough." Chen's eyebrows rose. "Explain. The program existed because the system allowed it, because Omegas are treated as property instead of people, because gifted individuals are seen as resources to exploit rather than citizens to protect." Seren's hands were steady despite the room full of eyes on her. "If you want to prevent this from happening again, you need to change the laws. Make it illegal to conscript anyone against their will. Establish oversight for how gifted individuals are recruited and employed. Create protections so that no one, Omega or otherwise, can be disappeared without consequences." The room erupted in murmurs. Chen raised a hand for silence. "Those are significant changes," she said carefully. "They're necessary changes," Seren replied. "Otherwise, you're just putting a bandage on a broken bone and hoping it heals straight." Chen studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "You're right, and I'll take your recommendations to the full assembly." She looked at Kyle. "Anything to add?" "Just one thing," Kyle said. "The people who enabled this, the guards, the administrators, the council members who looked the other way, they need to face consequences too. Not just Vex and his inner circle. Everyone who participated. We're working on that. It will take time. I understand. But justice delayed is justice denied. These people deserve answers. They deserve to see everyone responsible held accountable." Chen nodded slowly. "Noted. And I give you my word. We will pursue this to the fullest extent of the law." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The hearing ended with formal commendations for both Kyle and Seren. Medals they didn't want, speeches they barely listened to, handshakes from politicians trying to associate themselves with the victory. But afterward, when they walked out into the sunlight, the freed Omegas were waiting. They didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at Seren like she'd given them back something they thought was lost forever. Then one of them, the woman with the steel voice who'd refused to leave without Seren, stepped forward. "We wanted to thank you," she said, "for coming back, for not forgetting us." "I could never forget you," Seren said quietly. "We know. That's why you're still here." The woman smiled. "We're starting a support group for everyone who survived the program. To help each other heal, we'd like you to be part of it." "I'd be honored." Another Omega, the man with burns on his arms, spoke up. "We're also working with Magistrate Chen on the new legislation, making sure it actually protects people instead of just sounding good. Could use your insight there, too." "Whatever you need," Seren said. They talked for a while longer, making plans, sharing ideas. Kyle watched from a few steps away, seeing Seren transform from the broken woman who'd collapsed in his cabin to someone who stood tall and spoke with authority. She'd found her purpose. One of the Omegas noticed him standing apart. "You're part of this too, you know. You saved us as much as she did." "I just did what needed doing," Kyle said. "That's more than most people can say." The Omega held out his hand. "Thank you for everything." Kale shook it. "Take care of each other." "We will." As the group dispersed, Thera appeared from the crowd. Well, that was quite the spectacle. You saw? Kale asked. I wouldn't miss it. My people need to know their efforts weren't wasted. She fell into step beside them. The magistrates want to meet with the resistance. Officially recognize us as a legitimate organization working for reform. That's good, right? Seren said. It's complicated. Recognition means scrutiny, means playing by their rules. Thera shrugged. But it also means funding, legal protections, and a seat at the table when decisions get made. Could be worth the trade-off. What do you think? Kael asked. I think the fight's changing. We spent years operating in shadows because the system was too corrupt to trust. But you two proved the system can be fixed if enough people demand it. She smiled. So maybe it's time to stop being rebels and start being reformers. That sounds boring, Seren said. It probably will be. But boring means fewer people dying. I'll take boring. They walked through the capital together. 3 people who'd started as outcasts and somehow ended up at the center of a revolution they'd never planned. The city was rebuilding. The kingdom was changing. And for the first time in years, the future felt like something worth believing in. That night, back at the resistance stronghold, Kael found himself standing in front of the cabin he'd been assigned. It was small, simple, but it had a real bed and a door that locked, and windows with actual glass. It was more than he'd had in 3 years. He was about to go inside when he heard footsteps behind him. Seren stood there, looking uncertain in a way he rarely saw from her anymore. Can we talk? She asked. Always. They sat on the steps outside his cabin, looking at the stars. The same stars they'd watched from the mountain ridge. The same stars that had witnessed everything they'd survived. I've been thinking, Seren said, about what comes next. For us. Us? You and me. Individually, together. However this works. She looked at him. We went through hell and somehow came out the other side. But we did it because we were running towards something, fighting something. Now that fight's changing, becoming something slower and more bureaucratic, and I don't know if we fit into that world, Kael finished. Yeah, he understood. They were fighters, survivors, people forged in crisis and catastrophe. Peace felt foreign, almost threatening in its ordinariness. I don't know if I fit either, he admitted. I've spent 3 years alone and the last month fighting for my life. Normality feels like a trap. So what do? We figure it out, day by day. Together if you want, separately if you don't. Kael looked at her. But we don't have to have all the answers right now. We just survived the impossible. We're allowed to be uncertain about what comes next. Seren leaned her head on his shoulder. I like the together option, if you're offering. I'm offering. Good, because I'm tired of being alone, even when I'm surrounded by people. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence until Seren said, Thera offered me a position, official role in the resistance leadership, advocating for Omega rights and overseeing reforms. That's amazing. She offered you one too, strategic planning and council oversight. Kael blinked. She did? She said you have the tactical mind and the experience to make sure the council doesn't backslide into old patterns. Seren smiled. Plus, you're apparently good at making impossible plans work. I had help with that. We made a good team. We did. Kael considered the offer, leadership, purpose, a chance to actually change things instead of just surviving them. What did you tell her? I said yes, on the condition that we work together as partners. Partners. Equals. No hierarchy. Just 2 people trying to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. Kael felt something shift in his chest, something that felt like the future opening up instead of closing down. I like that, he said. Partners. Is that a yes? Yeah, it's a yes. Seren smiled, a real, genuine smile that made her look younger than her years. Then I guess we're doing this. Guess so. Any idea what we're getting ourselves into? Absolutely none. Perfect. I wouldn't trust it if we did. 3 months later, the kingdom held its first open assembly. Representatives from every settlement, every guild, every faction that had spent years without a voice gathered in the capital to discuss the future. It was messy and loud and chaotic. It was democracy. Kael and Seren attended as representatives of the resistance and as advocates for the reformed Omega protection laws. They stood before the assembly and told their story. Not the sanitized version the magistrates preferred, but the raw truth of what they'd survived and why it mattered. People listened. Some argued. Some agreed. But no one could deny the evidence or dismiss the witnesses standing in front of them. By the end of the assembly, 17 new laws had been proposed. 8 passed immediately. The rest were sent to committee for refinement. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Walking out of the assembly hall, Seren turned to Kael. "We actually did it. We changed the law." "We started to change it," Kael corrected. "This is just the beginning." "I know, but it's a good beginning." "Yeah, it is." They walked through the Capitol together, past buildings being rebuilt, past newspapers shouting about reform, past people arguing passionately about the future. The kingdom was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but healing. "Do you ever think about going back?" Seren asked. "To the mountains? To that cabin?" "Sometimes," Kael admitted. "Not to live there, but to see it. Remember where we started." "We should go, when things calm down." "Things are never going to calm down." "Then we should go anyway." Kael smiled. "Deal." They continued walking, two people who'd been broken by the system and somehow put themselves back together strong enough to break the system in return. Behind them, the sun was setting over the Capitol. Ahead, the future stretched out uncertain and challenging and full of work that would never be completely finished. But they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. 6 months after the tribunal, the northern compound was demolished. Kael and Seren stood with the other survivors and watched as explosives reduced the building to rubble. Each blast felt like an exorcism, each falling wall a piece of the past crumbling into dust. When the last wall fell, the survivors stood in silence. Then, slowly, people started to speak, sharing memories, naming those who hadn't survived, promising to remember. Seren stepped forward and placed a marker in the rubble, a simple stone with 11 names carved into it, the ones who'd made it out. And below them, 19 more names, the ones who hadn't. "We won't forget," she said quietly, "any of you." The survivors stood together, united by trauma, but no longer defined by it. They'd built something new from the ruins: support networks, advocacy groups, educational programs. They'd turned their pain into purpose. Kael watched Seren speak with the others, saw how they looked to her for guidance and strength. She'd become a leader without trying, just by refusing to let the darkness win. Later, as they walked away from the demolition site, Seren said, "I used to dream about this place burning, about watching it destroyed. And now? Now I don't need to dream it. It's gone, really gone." She looked at him. "We did that. We did. So what do we do now?" Kael thought about the question, about the work waiting for them back at the stronghold, about the laws still being written, the reforms still being fought for, the people still needing help, about the life they'd started building together, messy and uncertain and nothing like what either of them had imagined. But it was theirs. "Now we keep going," he said. "We keep fighting, keep building, keep making sure what happened here never happens anywhere else. That's a lifetime of work. Good thing we have a lifetime." Seren took his hand. Together? Together. They walked back toward the future, two survivors who'd decided that surviving wasn't enough, that they could be more than their trauma, more than their scars, more than the people the world had tried to make them. They could be the change they'd fought for. And in a kingdom slowly learning to value justice over power, that was the most revolutionary thing of all: the exile and the Omega, the forgotten and the stolen. Now the builders of something new. From the frozen wilderness of the Velrath Mountains to the halls of power in the capital, they'd traveled a road no one thought possible. They'd broken chains, toppled corrupt systems, and proved that even the most discarded among them could change the world. But more than that, they'd found each other. And in doing so, they'd found themselves. The mountains still stood in the distance, snow-covered and eternal. But Kael and Seren didn't look back. They looked forward. To the work ahead. To the battles yet to fight, to the life they'd chosen instead of the one that had been chosen for them. And somewhere in the ruins of that demolished compound, new things were already growing, small, fragile shoots of grass pushing through the rubble, life insisting on itself even in the aftermath of destruction. It was a fitting metaphor. The kingdom had fallen and was rising again. Different. Better. Built on truth instead of lies, on justice instead of power, on the voices of those who'd been silenced for too long. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was theirs to shape. And Kyle Varin and Saren Ashfall, once exiled, once imprisoned, once forgotten, stood at the center of it all. Not as victims, not as heroes, but as architects of the new order rising from the ashes of the old. Together. And that was enough.